Hello and welcome back to Dr. Neurosaurus. Today's Paleo Spotlight is Dr. Abigail West. Abby is a teaching assistant professor at the University of Pittsburgh who uses their training to teach the next generation of biologists. We chatted about teaching careers, museum collections, fieldwork, and more in this episode. Let's dig in. Abby, welcome.
Hi. Thanks for having me.
Thanks for coming on the show. So you and I both did our training at the American Museum of Natural History and then proceeded to go slightly different paths. Can you tell us a little bit about the work you did at the museum?
Oh, yeah. So for my PhD research, I did a sort of a combination of things. They were all sort of centered around understanding very different aspects of things about ancient mammals. The core of the dissertation was using this method called biochronology, which is where you use the fossils that are contained within rocks to figure out how old the rocks are. So like if you know an animal was 20 million to 15 million years old, like that's when the species was alive, then you know that any rocks that you find those fossils in must be that age too. And the project was working on figuring out basically a map of all of South America with ages of localities based on the fossils they contained. Some of the other stuff I did was study the fossils themselves a little bit in a couple of different ways. One of the really fun projects I got to do was to extract ancient DNA from some fossils that were found actually in Alaska and do a few different analyses there. And I know that data has been used at least one more time by someone else, which is like very satisfying. I ended up sort of taking more of a teaching track in my career.
Teaching is super important and it's really hard. And it's fascinating to see how different people end up doing. Like they identify that they like research more and go down the research track, and others like you and I identify that we like teaching more and we go down teaching tracks.
Yeah.
What courses are you currently teaching?
Every fall, pretty much, I teach vertebrate morphology, which is a comparative anatomy lecture. We cover basically everything from the earliest vertebrate up to things like mammals and dinosaurs and lizards and turtles. I also teach 2 sections of a lab that goes along with that. And then my last course that I teach every fall is a writing course that helps students who are majoring in ecology and evolution get to be better science writers. In the spring, I teach intro bio, so I get a whole bunch of freshmen and really get to talk to them about biology for one of the first science college classes they've taken. And then I teach an upper level course on evolution as well.
I also get to teach introductory bio in spring, and it's so much fun. The students that we get basically haven't watched nature documentaries before. And so I get to ask them questions like, have you guys heard of birds of paradise? And they say no. And I flip out a little bit and get really excited to show them that clip from Planet Earth with David Attenborough narrating the birds of paradise. It's such a fun experience getting to introduce big crowds to these amazing life forms. How do you find it at UPitt?
Yeah, it's a pretty similar experience. Like there's always some students that do know things about like weird, obscure animals. And there's also always a bunch that don't and are really like interested to learn. I think it's interesting, especially in intro bio, because we have some students who like come in knowing they're going to be science majors, and then some students who just take the course because they need maybe a science credit or something and end up finding it really fun. So it is really hard though, as a result, to make sure it's a class that's appealing to everybody and interesting to everybody. So I would say that's a big challenge.
Yeah, threading the needle between, the bio majors who need it for foundational concepts in the major, and then the senior communications students who are just in there for their science credit. It's tough. It's tough. And it takes a really particular form of like teaching to be able to get concepts across to both of those audiences.
Yeah, you definitely have to think about what the students are coming in with and really try and tailor it to that, which is like would be fine, except for it's a class of 300 students. So then you have to kind of think about like how much you're able to tailor it at all. I find if you just like seem really enthusiastic and make it like a fun activity for them to come to class every day, that kind of works for everybody.
Yes, I find similar things with my slightly smaller class of about, 70.
Mhm.
How did you make the realization or identify in yourself that you wanted to do more teaching and less research?
I think it started in grad school where I was realizing I was devoting more energy to preparing to do my TAing work and grading and thinking about the activities we're going to be doing in class. I was finding that more interesting than working on my research projects. And it was hard at first for me to tell whether that was just because the research projects were giving me stress because they were like difficult work that I was having to come up with out of my own brain, whereas TAing was like, a professor saying, here's this activity, go and do it with the students. So it was a little bit lower stakes. Um, but I think it actually turned out to be, a genuine feeling because then I came to do my postdoc at the Natural History Museum here in Pittsburgh, the Carnegie Museum, and found myself spending again more time and energy and having more interest in doing the outreach work that I was doing at the museum than on my postdoc research. So I kind of didn't really even know at that time that a teaching professor position was a possibility, just because I had come through institutions that didn't really have that many undergraduates and so weren't that big on having people whose job was just teaching at an undergrad level. Um, and I ended up getting the job at Pitt as a visiting position, just for one semester, like in kind of a temporary fashion. Um, and then I guess I just must have done such a great job, or maybe they were just really still needed someone to keep teaching in that position that it ended up becoming a permanent one. And I'm really glad I did. I think obviously at that time I was sort of finishing up my postdoc and applying to lots and lots and lots of jobs. And this one that was like right across the street from where I was currently working, um, turned out to be actually a really good fit.
That's incredibly fortunate, and not having to pick up and move every, 2 to 4 years is really important. I think that's really valuable information for people because I think a lot of us enter into graduate school thinking that research positions or positions that have a little bit of teaching and mostly research are the only path forward for
Mhm.
paleontologists. But that's not true even a little bit anymore. So I think it's really valuable to hear your experience and see how you recognize this passion in yourself and sort of navigated your career to get there.
Totally. Yeah. I think it took a long time to recognize because of what you say, like because people are so kind of have this sort of one track mind about like you need to get like a tenure track position or whatever. And I think that although that does suit a lot of people, I just don't think that would suit me when I think about like how much I hate applying for grants and stuff. Like if that was most of my job, I would just be miserable. So
Abby, what kinds of advice do you have for children and maybe older teenager aged people who want to get into paleontology?
well, there's first of all, there's lots of different ways. I think I can talk about how I got into it and how many people I know did. I think many people who are paleontologists have an undergraduate college degree. So I did my college, I have a bachelor's in biology. Other people get their bachelor's in geology. Some people do a double major. It's often sort of between those two. Many paleontologists, after they graduate from their undergrad, stay for further study, right? So, like, I did a PhD to become a professor. You can work in higher education also with a master's at various levels. You could work in a museum, and I've done a fair bit of work in museum settings too. And there's lots of different jobs in that arena that are not just the academic ones, right? So there's like people who take care of the fossils, preparators, conservators, collections managers, that kind of stuff. There's people who talk to the public in some way or another, people involved in doing the exhibits or working in the museum, in the public spaces in the museum, talking to visitors, stuff like that. And all of those things may or may not require various levels of education, but all of those things are sort of worth learning about and maybe even trying to get involved in, even at the stage you're at, like when you're in middle school or high school. And that's a really great way to just like meet the people who are doing the work and get to know them and get to learn about what they're doing. And also like I think something that continues to be really, really important is meeting those people and, asking them for help. So, talking to them, finding out about their career paths and saying like, I want to apply to this opportunity. Will you help me with my application? I think stuff like that is really important. So like seeking out mentoring, I think was really important to me. And I think when I look at my undergrads, continues to be a really important part of getting into the field.
Yes, the importance of good mentorship is, I mean, I was going to say understated, but I think it is understated. If you don't have a good mentor at any level in your education, it just becomes untenable. It makes the whole experience so much worse. And I think we're both pretty fortunate in the educations we've had and the mentorship we've had. It's been
Yeah.
pretty incredible. Um,
Yeah.
so you've worked at the American Museum of Natural History
Mhm.
and at the Carnegie in Pittsburgh.
Yeah.
Given those two museums, and I know clearly you've been to more than those two, but those are the two that you resided in. What's your favorite exhibit out of those two museums?
Ooh, um, great
Hard hitter,
question.
hard hitting questions here at Dr. Neurosaurus.
So the Carnegie Museum has a little part in its permanent exhibits that I don't know exactly what it's called, but it's specimens that came from the collections. So any across the collections of the museum. So these are specimens from like ornithology, herpetology, botany, all different types of specimens that had weird notes put in with them by their collectors. Um, and often with the animal specimens, it's stuff about like how the animal was found or like how it died. So like my favorite of all time is there's a hellbender. So like a big aquatic salamander that's found in the Appalachians around here. Um, and it's in a jar, it's preserved like a museum specimen in a jar of alcohol. And the note that someone wrote like 100 years ago when they were collecting it was died by choking on a marshmallow. And it's just in there, and it's just like the point of the exhibit, I think, is to show you that like stuff ends up in museum collections from all over and for all different reasons. Um, but there's some very weird, wacky things in there.
I have so many follow-up questions on that. One, how did it get a marshmallow?
That's the other fun thing is that there's like no other information than that on the card. And the person who collected it, obviously, we don't know who that was. They're probably long gone.
Oh my goodness. And then I guess if it's in alcohol, maybe the alcohol dissolves the marshmallow, but it'd be really interesting to like dive in there and see if it's still in there.
I don't know if the marshmallow is still in there.
Oh my goodness. So you are the second person to bring up finding fun notes in the collections, and I think that's something that maybe the public doesn't really know. That sometimes in these collections, people leave notes that are hilarious, or you find notes from your friends that had visited the collections that say like, "This is not this species. This is definitely something else. I don't know what it is, but it's not that."
Mhm. It's a really fun, like, I think, because like working as a scientist, you are part of a community to some extent, but it's easy to forget that because a lot of the work you do, especially when it's research-based work, you're alone, right? You're on your own in the collections looking at specimens, or you're on your own in front of your laptop writing up your results or whatever. And those little notes, I think, function as sort of like a little thread of community that it's like sending someone a little text like in the future anonymously, that sort of connects us all in a really like kind of a fun little way.
Have you had the opportunity to do field work? And if so, where have you gone?
I have. I've been really fortunate. I've done quite a bit of field work. I always say that, and then a little part of my brain goes, not enough. You want to do more, because it is definitely my favorite part of participating in paleontology. The first field work I ever did it was more geology than paleontology. Was in Scotland in the Lake District in the UK. And that I think really got me into it in a big way because just like I've always really enjoyed hiking and being outside and camping and stuff. And so just getting the opportunity to spend a day doing that and that be your day's work, I thought was really cool. The summer after I graduated, I was able to join a team in Wyoming doing like real paleontology, so like prospecting for fossils. I think that was the experience that made me really think I should pursue this as a career, because just like living for a couple of weeks in the wilds of Wyoming in the desert was just like a very peaceful and fun experience. And it scratches a particular itch for me, paleontology field work, which is the kind of joy of finding things on the ground. Because, you're basically, when you're looking for fossils, you're walking around looking at the ground. And, it was like, when you're a kid and you find a coin on the ground or something, but it was like that. But then you found something of possible scientific importance on the ground, and that was really cool. But by far the biggest trip I've been on was in 2016. I got to join an expedition that went to Antarctica looking for fossils, which was just like orders of like way more intense of a field trip than any of the others. Like normal field work, you kind of just like drive somewhere, like drive out to the desert and set up your tent and hang out there for a while. An Antarctic trip involves a government-funded icebreaker ship and a bunch of crew, and a huge amount of field gear, obviously, because it's, you have to deal with the cold and the wind and stuff. So it was just like a very much more labor-intensive way of getting to the field. But once you're there, it's exactly the same. You're just walking around, looking at the ground, picking up stuff. So yeah, that was a really amazing trip to get to go on too.
Antarctica sounds incredible.
It was cool. It was cool.
We had mentioned about the notes in collections feeling like a thread connecting you to someone in the past. And I find that fieldwork is the same. But the thing that gets me is that for this specific moment in time, you get connected with something that lived millions of years ago. And it's like your two lives intersect for that one moment of being able to discover it and pick it up. You're the first person to see it ever. It's incredible. It's just such a rush and such a good feeling to find something. And then there's all those days where you don't find anything, and it makes that moment of discovery so much more sweet.
Yeah, totally. And I think especially on those days where you don't find anything, the team that you're with in the field is really important too. I think it's a really great opportunity to like become better friends with the people that you work with, or whoever is on your team. They might not be people that you work with, right? They might be like collaborators from other institutions, or they might be people you didn't know before you got out there. But like it's definitely always a bonding experience of some kind.
Yeah, bonds you for life, those field experiences. Abby, thank you so much for joining us and sharing a little bit about your career. This has been incredible.
So glad I could be here. It was really fun talking to you.
We'll see you in the next video.